Hi, I'm Lauren Kemp.
And I'm Bridget Price.
And this is Entrepreneurs in Progress. So today I am very excited because we are talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart, which is mental health. And in many ways, this podcast has been therapeutic for me and Bridget, and has served as a creative outlet as we navigate being entrepreneurs, and has helped us go through the ups and downs on this journey. And I think that mental health is particularly important for entrepreneurs. So let's get started. Bridget, why does mental health matter?
Man, if we are not in a healthy mental state, we're just not going to be the best version of ourselves. And it's taken a really long time for us as a society and us as individuals to recognize the importance of mental health and the limitations that are forced upon us by our own bodies when we aren't tending to our mental health. We are taught to become mentally strong, to persevere, to overcome, to basically put your head down and work through things without really addressing problems that might be laying beneath the surface. And for entrepreneurs specifically, if mental health is not in check, I think you can only go so far before you burn out or tap out and hit that wall where you need to address it. So it's really just another component of our overall health that we need to make sure we monitor, just like our physical well-being, what we put in our bodies, and how we take care of ourselves. That mental health piece is just one component of that.
Yeah, our mental health affects every important aspect of our lives. Your mental health impacts your physical health. It impacts your relationships when you're not the best version of yourself. It can impact your career, your decision-making, and of course, your happiness, just to name a few. So it's not like it's just siloed into one area. It affects every area of your life. And I think you mentioned how like society and the stigma around mental health has been shifting. And I thought that was interesting because I had a conversation with my parents about this, and millennials and Gen Z, like I think Gen Z, even more so the millennials, are viewing mental health and going to therapy as like maintenance, like that's something that is just as important as your physical health. You go to a doctor for your physical health, you go to a therapist for your mental health. And then with my dad and mom's generation, it was you go to a therapist as a last resort, last ditch effort. This is when you go focus on that. And my dad was saying before that, he's like, the generation before me, you only go to a therapist if you are literally insane. Like you're crazy, you're going to an institution. So seeing how that has evolved down to where we are now, where the stigma is still kind of around, and I definitely can feel it with older generations, but I'm still going to talk about it and work on breaking that down. But as far as mental health and entrepreneurs go, I found this interesting and sad statistic that 72% of entrepreneurs are directly or indirectly affected by mental health issues, compared to 48% of non-entrepreneurs, according to a study by the National Institute of Mental Health. So 3/4 of entrepreneurs deal with mental health issues, but not everyone is seeking help for them or getting the help that they need.
I think that's such a large disparity, that 72% of entrepreneurs versus 48%. That's almost a 30-point difference. That's huge. And I think we need to probably break down potentially the reasons why that may be the case. And I believe, I'm only speaking anecdotally, I haven't done or dug into the research behind those numbers. But as an entrepreneur myself, the nature of being an entrepreneur can be breeding grounds for these mental health issues, from the working the late hours, the attitude around this hustle and grind mentality, in addition to the culture that we see, constantly reading about people in our business or nearby industries and what seemingly appears to be overnight successes, comparing ourselves constantly to others, having a goalpost that's constantly moving, right? And then lastly, pursuing an entrepreneurial path, even though this has been around since before actual money was around. I feel like in our society, especially in like America, where entrepreneurs are a minority in some weird way. And we feel often isolated as a result of how we go about earning our money and choosing this path. And so there's just so many things that factor into the deterioration of our mental health as a result of the environment of being an entrepreneur. And so I think what we need to look for is, one, making sure we kind of adopt or change our mindset and make sure that, just like every other part of our lives, whether it's what we eat, our physical health, that we do that maintenance check. Like, we need to, I feel like it's part of that checklist that entrepreneurs should have in terms of what do they need to be successful. I also think that entrepreneurs should look for being in tune with their feelings, being in tune with when they know they're approaching burnout, knowing when they're feeling overworked, also being acutely aware of any anxiety that they might feel throughout this process, and maybe journaling it or talking to someone about it. And then I think entrepreneurs have a commonality in that we always feel like we're in a race against the clock. Like, we have this arbitrary time in which we can achieve the success, and so we're rushing to get there. And I think we have to check that. And I think we have to make sure we build relationships around our entrepreneurial lifestyle, maintain our friendships, pursue hobbies, take some time to just do things for yourself so you can have that balance that is so desperately needed in entrepreneurship.
I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to prioritize other things in their life, like have other values and things that are important to you. If your business is the only thing that matters to you, I think that's when you start to get the loss of your work-life balance. That's when you get that burnout, that anxiety, that loneliness. And so when you value not just your business, but you value your relationships, and I'm going to say you value your health, and that includes physical and mental health, because they both should fit under health. You know, when you value these other things, you will find time and prioritize the things that are important to you. And it's a holistic approach, because all these things work together to help you become successful, help you feel good about yourself, your health. It's a better life when all of the pieces are working together. And sometimes, I think I've mentioned this before, there are different times where the balance will need to shift, because you'll need to focus on your relationships more at one point. You might need to focus more on work at one point, and you might need to focus more on your health at one point, but they all do impact each other. So I think that in order to take care of your mental health, your business, and your relationships, you need to at least dedicate time to all of them and try and balance them as much as possible. And hobbies, time for yourself.
Yeah. It's hard. You have to make a conscious effort at this. I don't think it's going to come instantly. When you're an entrepreneur, you're typically defined as someone who is industrious, who can burn the midnight oil. But you have to be able to consciously check out of that and make sure you have time for yourself. I have to tell myself, at this time, I'm going to read for an hour, or I'm going to go work out for an hour, or I'm going to actually spend the work day or work week, sometime in the work week, and make dinner versus ordering out or something of the sort. And you have to decide to make those choices, because you'll get into this kind of hole and you'll keep digging further and further before you realize it's hard to get out. I think also having someone who can help you be accountable. I think I've recognized when Marx's mental health is suffering, and I'm able to check in on him and say, hey, you need a break, or you need to spend some time away from this. When he was starting out earlier on in his entrepreneurial path in his early 20s, it was very common and easy for him to just ice everyone out, like for long periods of time. That meant his friendships, and sometimes school would go by the wayside. He would just have this linear, myopic focus on this goal he was trying to attain. And he recognized it sometimes a little too late that he compromised a lot of his relationships. And he's been in the process over the last few years rebuilding that and being more engaged and being aware of what that can do. But it helps when you can have someone who's accountable and helps you stay consistent, whether that's a partner, significant other, someone who you work with, anyone, any friends who can just monitor that or check in with you is always nice to have.
Yeah. It's tough because even if you're there saying, hey, I see you struggling, you need to take a break, you need to do this, there's only so much you can do to help somebody. It's something that they're going to have to decide to do for themselves too. So it definitely helps having someone, if you're having trouble recognizing when you need a break or that other things are falling to the wayside. But as much support as we can give people, it's also on them to prioritize things and consciously make that decision.
That's a great point, because only in the last year or so, and I think the pandemic, with us being slower in nature, has allowed me to do a lot of reflecting and introspection. And at first I used to get really annoyed with my mom or my family when they said, Bridget, you work too much, or you need to pull back a little bit. And I'm like, you don't understand. I have to do this. I have all these things on my plate. But now I'm more tuned into what they are saying, and I'm responding differently to that. I recognize that sometimes they probably do feel helpless, and that's all they can say is, you're working a little too much. Is that all you do? And I am more aware of, okay, what am I putting out into the world? What's the perception I'm giving my family and friends? Am I giving the perception that I can't make time for them because this is more important than them? Or how can I have or strike more balance and be able to effectively communicate? Yes, I am working hard. Yes, it requires some time. Some days I am working 12, 15-hour days, but it's not like that all the time. And, or how can I get across like that I hear what they're saying and I am tending to my mental health? And it's hard sometimes.
Yeah. And I think you brought up a good point earlier too, about how entrepreneurs feel that sense of urgency, that they are racing against the clock, and then you just keep moving the goalposts. So it's easy to say, oh, this is more important right now because of this deadline or this urgency. And in reality, most of the times it's not, unless you're like literally running out of money and you have a 2-week runway. But we both have bootstrap businesses where it's like, okay, like we're profitable, you know, would we like to grow faster? Absolutely. But is it necessary at the expense of our health and relationships and other aspects of life? No.
We are making these timelines for ourselves.
They're so subjective.
Yeah. And it would even be more helpful if we built more time out instead of thinking we needed to get something done in this really small period of time. What would happen if we just extended that a few days, a week or two? How might that impact our health? And I think that is something that should also be considered as entrepreneurs, is like, how are you going to pace yourself? What are you going to do? And I've learned that sometimes there's been this fear for me of starting because I've thought, oh my gosh, I can't believe I've waited this long to pursue XYZ. Now I'm too old, or I've wasted so much time. I almost don't want to do it. But then you keep thinking about it and thinking about it and thinking about it. And before you know it, another year has passed. And my kind of philosophy around that now is just start, because you will be further a year from now than where you were last year. And it may not be what you felt like you could have been doing a couple of years ago, or you've lost this time, but you can certainly make up time, or you can reshift how you think about that time. What did you do in those other years that you weren't pursuing your venture? You did attain skills or experiences that have made you stronger, I believe.
This is something that Brian and I run into a lot, is there's always more to do. There is a never ending list of things you could be doing for your business. And so you will be busy indefinitely if you do not set any boundaries or accept that, you know what, we're doing the best we can. We have accomplished a lot. I think looking back and like reminding yourself, yeah, we did accomplish XYZ over the course of this year or this quarter or whatever, to help you feel like you've accomplished something despite the overwhelming amount of things that you don't have the time and energy and bandwidth for. I know entrepreneurship has definitely made me a more patient person.
Yeah.
Because you always think that you can get more done, or you always expect that, oh, I should have been able to get more done. I should have been able to do all of this or all of that. And it's that.
But why are we so hard on ourselves? Why do we believe that we can always get more done in a short amount of time? What happened to the ability to really accurately measure or predict how long something might take? And why are we constantly rushing? And why a lot of professionals encounter that feeling, like needing to over deliver and under promise.
I think part of it comes from the digital age. You could be working 24 hours a day. I think with entrepreneurships, some of it's comparing, some of it's just the always on nature of our culture and that culture of you need to be working hard to earn it. And I think, yeah, the always on mentality is why you believe like, oh, I could do more.
Technically, we could do more, but is that the right thing to do? We could always do more, but how will I be impacted as a result of that? And I don't think we weigh that enough. And we're learning to, and we are realizing that the work will always be there. If we don't finish it today, it'll be there tomorrow. Yes, all of this is not to say that you shouldn't prioritize your tasks or responsibilities or things that you need to get done, but this is just changing the lens in regard to how we overwork ourselves or exert ourselves at the expense of our mental health.
A way to recognize if you're struggling with mental health is when you find small tasks really difficult and overwhelming. When you just like, I can't even decide what to do for dinner. You're just so burnt out and overwhelmed. I can't even tell you, like, I can't even tell Brian, like, I don't know, like little tasks seem insurmountable. But then when you're fully rested and you're not burnt out and you're feeling great, you're like, oh yeah, let me get 5 of these done. It's easy. Yeah. So I think when small things are hard and making decisions becomes hard, and that's one of the things to look out for.
That's a great point. It's a lot easier for me to make dinner on a Monday or Tuesday night because the brunt of the week has yet to really get to me and bog me down. But then as the week progresses, I struggle just to figure out what to eat for dinner. Hell, I even struggle what I'm going to eat for breakfast the next day. Like, that's a really great point. When those small tasks seem insurmountable, I think that means you're probably close to hitting a wall.
What has been your experience with mental health and building your business at the same time?
Man, I'll be honest, and this is probably not going to sound good, but in the beginning stages, mental health, that was just not something of consideration when we were pursuing our business. And that's really sad to say. For me, it took a few losses to start recognizing the importance of my mental health and what was actually happening. So when I was working full time and we were growing the business, and Marcus was working full time and working in the business, those were the peak times where we had the most frequent arguments or disagreements and where we just really felt like pushed to our limits. We constantly felt pulled in 2 different directions. And there was some anxiety for me. There was also a questioning of whether or not all of this was worth it. I wouldn't necessarily call it depression per se, but really asking myself, is this a means to an end? Is this going to pay off? What am I doing this for? And usually with entrepreneurs, the whole point of pursuing entrepreneurship is you have no question without a doubt that this is what you want to do and that this is something that will pay off for you. And I was questioning all of that. And for me, that attitude probably exacerbated a lot of the frustrations or conversations or arguments I had with Marcus at the time, because I didn't have the full buy-in, but I was too exhausted to buy in. I was so tired. And a sign for me too, in my work life, I was dreading going into work on Mondays. And so I think that's a sign when you're working that you probably should start looking somewhere else or tap out. And so I was dreading going in, and I'm like, okay, I need to figure something out. They figured it out for me. I was laid off, but in that instance,
sorry,
I know it's okay.
Be laughing at that.
I know it's fine. It happened. And that was also like a turning point for me. That was one of the losses I am talking about, where you start thinking about, okay, what is it that I'm really doing? What is it that I want to do? And there was some clarity there for me because I felt relieved, if that makes sense. For me, I've always had a hard time pulling the trigger on certain decisions like that, like leaving my job or tapping out, that type of thing. But I felt relieved. I wasn't worried about my next dollar paycheck, which I know a lot of people can't always say the same, but I felt like I can figure out how I'm going to proceed now. And so ultimately I was burnt out, and I was able to recalibrate and then jump into our business full time. And that was one of the best things that could have ever happened. And it was just a matter of time where we were having a conversation with Marcus and we were like, you need to do the same thing. Like, you need to quit your job and we just need to focus on this full time, because he was still dealing with some of that anxiety and he was still dealing with the pressures of having to work full time and then be in his business full time. And it's tough. And I really did not think about mental health with relation to our business until last year when the pandemic hit. And so maybe I was thinking about it prior to that when I left my job and focused on ADHD full time. But it was one of those, it wasn't conscious. I didn't realize that's what I was drawing from that. So now I think it's important for me to have a well-rounded experience. So I need to have my relationships. I need to have my friendships intact. I need to have my personal relationship with my husband intact. I need to have my familial relationships, and I need to also be present in the business. So I've done a lot of things since then. I've been in therapy for the past year. I focused on rebuilding my health. So going to the gym, changing my diet, and just really prioritizing it. So there'd be times where maybe I was burnt out because of work and I didn't feel like going to my therapy sessions, but in a year's time, I've not missed a therapy appointment. And so for me, it's just showing up and making sure I give myself that time out the month to focus on that. And that's been super, super helpful.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you and your experiences with your mental health and the business and building, and how has that played a role in even how you both operate?
It's been tough. I'm not gonna lie. I have anxiety and depression, so it's not great, especially if you're trying to build a business, because being an entrepreneur is, like you said, that environment. It's a stressful environment and you feel a lot of pressure from just trying to build a company and knowing that its success or failure is dependent on you. So I definitely struggled in the beginning. I think part of that too was like wanting to get it right the first time, being a perfectionist, not being okay with failure, not being patient. So
right.
All these different things contributed to me having a really rocky experience in the beginning with working on Cozy Cactus, a little less so with Rotive because that's more Brian's thing, but it's one of those things where I definitely prioritized it. Going to therapy helped. It's like you said, working out, eating healthy, seeing people. It's hard because those are all the things that you don't want to do when you're in the middle of a depressive episode or you're anxious. Like all the things that can help you are the things you do not want to do when you're going through it. So part of it is just clawing your way out of that hole. And mental health has always been pretty important to me. And so the way it also shows up in our business is I made it a value. Like health, building wellness into our company culture was super important to me. It was something that I wasn't going to budge on. It's the hill that I was going to die on with Brian. I'm like, no, this matters. I think that we also, as leaders in our company, need to lead by example. I had a couple of managers, I think, in my work experience that really did that. They led by example, and then you feel more empowered to do the same. Because if you're preaching, oh, health and well-being matters, but then you're working 80, 100 hours and not taking any time off, and your employee sees that, they're not going to feel as okay doing it. Like, I would not feel as okay if I'm seeing my manager working all the time and not taking any time off or taking care of their mental health. And I was like, ooh, I don't know if I can do that without. Do you believe what you're saying? Is it a priority?
That's very fair, because even in the companies we worked with before, when they've attempted to prioritize mental health, or at least stress that was a value of theirs and that they care about our mental health, their actions said otherwise. Whether it was through the long, grueling hours, whether it was their leadership not technically living up to those standards as well, contradicting what they would say based on the workloads, or blurring the lines of your job responsibilities, making you feel like you didn't have a safe space to report things to HR without retaliation, like so many things that they basically weren't living up to that creed. So I commend you for incorporating it into your business, because I think that's a super intentional move that a lot of other companies don't make. I think they have it in the back of their minds and they're like, yeah, sure, of course, if you need a mental health day, take it. But actually communicating that and making sure it's something that you both adhere to so your employee can see that example is really amazing. And so I'm really
We're
happy
trying.
to hear that. Yeah. Yeah.
And it's all built off of previous experiences. So like we think about it and we are, like you said, we are intentional about it. We look at our onboarding process and we go, is this a reasonable amount of time to learn all of this? Because starting a new job is usually stressful because you're like, okay, I need to prove myself, and you're learning so much new stuff, and it can be overwhelming, and it can be a bad onboarding experience or it can be a good one. That's one way to make sure that wellness is somewhere in there, because if you overwhelm people or you don't even provide any training or onboarding, I've seen people leave companies because they're like, I am not set up for success. I'm out. I'm not happy here.
I'd rather have a slow onboarding process or slow training process than moving them too quickly through the process and making them feel like I'm not set up to succeed here, and this is going to be a challenge. And if this is how it's going to be, I'm not sure if this is the place for me.
Yeah. Another example of wellness and how we run our business is we also, like Brian and I are talking about, what's reasonable for this job description. So what's reasonable to expect someone to work. I think that it's hard for small businesses because, you know, the whole wearing other hats, and it's hard to define a role that could change and evolve based on the needs of the business because it's still not settled in yet. Yeah. So we've been trying to balance what is reasonable, what is like the right amount of work that is productive, but still gives them creative time. It gives them time to get what they need done. Like the worst feeling is feeling like you're never caught up on work. Like you're always constantly behind. I hate that. Yeah. And I felt like that at one of my previous jobs. What I loved about working at Salesforce is I could get a lot of my stuff done in the morning, in the first half of the day. And in the second half, I got to work on other projects and things that I really cared about or was interested in or wanted to try and do. So I had time to be creative. I had time to work on things, and I never felt like I was constantly behind. So I think like with wellness in particular, not only do we as owners need to prioritize it for ourselves and lead by example, but we have to figure out how it factors in and affects our employees and their job and what benefits they need to feel like they're being taken care of and they have their well-being is also prioritized.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point about the job description and making sure that the work matches what you said it was going to match and that it's not completely overwhelming. We ran into that problem in the beginning years of our business when we were looking for a virtual assistant. And so the primary responsibility for the virtual assistant was to answer our phones, to serve in the customer service capacity. But a lot of the virtual assistants that we got through, they had other skill sets or other things that they were capable of doing. And we thought, okay, we could utilize them to handle certain project loads, or when the lines are a little slow, they can spend their time doing this. And we found that our teams were overwhelmed by that. And even with our virtual assistants, you got to be careful, because if your role is not defined and you start blurring their responsibilities and what they're expected to do, the ball is going to drop somewhere. And then if we are approaching them, asking them what's wrong or how come you didn't get this done, they feel defensive and they don't know how to articulate all the time. It's because you had me doing this and I had this deadline I had to meet, and then I need to be available to the customer. And for our newest set of virtual assistants who've been with us for basically a year consistently, no problems or issues, we said we're hiring 2 virtual assistants as opposed to 1. And we're going to define their roles so they know exactly what they're doing. Because what we were doing was that whole habit I think a lot of small businesses run into, even large corporations, where you cross-train. And so someone, you know how to do a little bit of everything in the case that someone's unavailable. I think cross-training is important, but maybe not immediately, maybe not throwing them into the fire so quick and fast. And by defining the roles and not making cross-training a super focus, I think we've gotten the most out of our teams. And it's so great because yesterday we were literally in the team call, and we just hired a new HR generalist, and we were making the introductions, and one of our virtual assistants said, I don't feel overwhelmed here. The workload is at a good pace. I know what I'm expected to do, but then there are those kind of surprise projects or initiatives that come up that we're capable. And that was just like music to my ears. I couldn't believe she said that. And I was so happy because I'm like, yes, our team is not feeling the throes of like being overworked and underappreciated and things like that. And so that was really huge for us. That's a huge win because you're right. As a small business, you want to wear all these hats. Again, we've done it. It's our business. So we are going to be HR. We are going to be marketing. We are going to be finance. We are going to handle payroll. We are going to be dispatch. We're going to do all of these things because that's what you have to do when you're starting out. And sometimes I think as entrepreneurs, we can do a poor job managing the expectations of those we work with or who we hire. And that can erode their mental health without us even knowing.
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem that Brian and I are working on right now, is because we have such a small business, like the role has changed a bit since our employee started, and we've been in communication and we've always asked like, hey, like, sorry, this is what the business needs. And we can work together to figure out a solution. Like, if this is what you want, if this is what you don't want, this is where we need you to be. And like talking through with people and giving them options and choices and being upfront with them, I think helps too, instead of just assuming and putting different responsibilities and not managing those expectations. So I think that has helped with them, but it's hard when you're a small business and your business needs change. Like, you hire someone for a role and we haven't been able to, we want to get to that point where we can just be like, this is the role, this is the expectations. And we have a deep enough bench to be like, okay, like you don't have to cross train on everything. Like that would be ideal.
Right.
And I think I wanted to bring up a point too. I think too often business owners or even managers, the mindset is trying to squeeze as much as you can out of your employees. I think the majority of places that I've worked at is like, how much can I get out of you? And I think that's what leads you to trouble and employee turnover and their well-being not being great. And that's the overwork. That's you'd finished this, job faster than normal. Like, here's some more work. It's like, I think that not everyone does this. There are companies out there that view their employees as an investment, as humans, because I feel like when you're just trying to squeeze everything you can out of someone, then the managers kind of view you as disposable, and it's not good for obviously the health and well-being of your employees. So I'm wondering, part of me gets it. You're paying for this employee, you're got benefits, you're stressed about making enough money and growing the business and such, but I think it's a trap to view your employees in that way, where you're basically squeezing as much as you can out of them instead of giving them like time investment and just the space to do their work without overloading them.
Ultimately, that falls on the entrepreneur or the business owner, and they have to,
or managers.
Yeah, or managers, and they have to recognize the shortcomings there and determine if they're trying to squeeze every little thing out of the employee for some gain, which will be minimal in the long term, because if you burn that employee out, they're going to quit or they're going to leave or they're not going to
perform. Yeah,
exactly. So you really have to assess like what the importance of that is, and if there's any other way you can acquire what you need through any other means other than burning out your employees. A lot of companies, I think, are operating under that urgency that we talked about earlier, where they feel like they don't have the time to figure that out. And because they have a body here, they need to get the most out of it in that given moment. It's a very short-sighted approach. And I think, unfortunately, some companies are okay with that temporary gain. They think by handling it now, they'll magically create some time in the future for them to deal with it later. But that just isn't how it works. You either deal with it now, or you have to deal with it later, and that the time you have to deal with it is still the same. Like, it's not going to, you're not going to magically have more time because you're thinking short-sighted now.
And it's not an easy thing to figure out because you can go too far on the other end of the spectrum and be paying someone for this job, but you're not getting enough value. Like you're losing money because they aren't doing enough. So it's figuring out what is reasonable for this job, paying the right amount for that particular position as well, because you don't want to be in a spot where you wait too long to fire is usually a fear for people. But that's why it's so hard. It's hard to deal with all these different decisions in your business because all of them impact your success. But I think you're so right about how it's such a short-sighted approach to try and squeeze everything out and overload your employees as much as possible.
Yeah. And then what can we do to open that flow up for employee feedback, right? Like how can we be receptive to understanding what they're able to handle if it is impacting their mental health, if it's impacting their ability to perform on the job? How do we create an open environment where they can express that without fearing that they're communicating that they're incapable? And I think a lot of us have run into that issue where we didn't want to speak up about something being too much because we didn't want to lose our job, or we didn't want to be viewed as incompetent or lazy or any negative attribute you can think of when it comes to being an employee.
Yeah, I think those types of conversations should happen in one-on-ones with your manager, because if you're having weekly one-on-ones, you're building up some of that trust. But I think what you also need are some solid metrics, because it may be that it was not a good fit. Not that you're not capable, but that it's just not a good fit. It's not working out. Brian and I have both experienced that in our careers. We've been in roles where we're struggling. We know that we have succeeded in previous roles. This is just not a good fit. We're not doing well. And that's okay. I think that people you have to it's so hard, but you have to set the right expectations and have the right metrics and have people be on the same page, and then make sure they're not feeling overwhelmed, that they're trained and set up for success, and then trying to figure out what's not working, I feel like is the entire entrepreneur experience in the business. It's like, what isn't working? What do we need? Which levers do we need to pull? Like
our scientific method. Like we're trying, test and repeat and weed out things. And it is constantly moving. I feel like being an entrepreneur is a constant moving goalpost because things change.
Yeah. So I would like to get back to mental health a bit and talk about what are some of the things that you do, and I know you've mentioned some of those things, to take care of your mental health as an entrepreneur.
For me, it's making sure I do something that can get my mind off of the business for a while. So that's reading. Lately, it's been writing. Sometimes it's just binging on TV, whether it's my favorite reality TV shows or something that I find on Netflix. I try to also spend some time or quality time with Marcus. And lately I've been making it a priority. The panorama is making this really hard, but just reconnecting with my friends and pursuing those relationships. So just anything that I can do that will recharge me. I'm an extroverted introvert. So I need people to recharge me, but then I need to also have that alone time to soak all of that in and then have it come out at later times. And really, for me lately, I've never been like this. I used to thrive, quote unquote, which I found out I really wasn't thriving. But I used to think that I thrived on quickly adapting to change and quickly navigating shit like it was a minefield or something like that. But what's really been effective for me is really establishing like a routine. And sometimes that routine might change. Like I like to work out before noon every day, but sometimes I have to work out at 4 or 5 o'clock. And really the part of the routine that's the most important is that I get the workout done. Even having those set times, writing my to-do list, that has been really helpful for me in terms of managing or keeping in check like my mental health and my boundaries and when I'm stretching myself too thin. In the business over the last year, I've become really familiar with delegating and trusting my team to do more. And so that's also what I'm focusing on too. So just those small things that allow me to remove myself from the work. I think entrepreneurs, we do that as much as we can, but there's some shit still wrestling way in the back there. I try to push it down. But yeah, just knowing that it'll be there tomorrow and telling myself that and reminding myself of that. And it's, some days are more challenging than others, but again, just trying to strike that overall balance.
Yeah, I think routine is such an important one because as entrepreneurs, you have a super unstructured day. And I have found that routine and structure really does help, at least for the first half of my day. I love having structure in the morning. Exercise, I know, plays a big impact on my mental health. I can tell like the weeks that I do work out versus the weeks that I don't, and how that affects my mood and how anxious I am that week. And what else? I think, like you said, spending time with friends and family. I like to write sometimes, writing just to get it down out of my head. Therapy, I know we've brought up multiple times, but it's so important because this is someone that you can talk to about all the stress that you're feeling or ups and downs with any aspect of your life, because they all impact each other. And I found that therapy helps me get to the root of things as well, like understanding, like it's okay to fail sometimes because it's not a catastrophic failure, and you need to bend a bit, so you don't snap. I think that
I like
date nights, date nights are helpful just because we work with our husbands, our significant others, to like do something that's not work related and to get out of the house for me, because we work from home, is super helpful. Fresh air in nature or just changing the environment. These are all things that are great. All these things work together and set you up for success when you have that structure, that routine, that habit.
I have a question with regard to you already recognizing that you've been dealing with anxiety and depression in your adulthood. Was that something you considered, or did you think about that heavily when you started Cozy Cactus or started working with Brian and Rotiv?
No, I didn't factor it in. Mostly because I just get so excited about the ideas or the business, and it's something that matters more to me to push through those things. And for a long time, I actually believed, if I just do enough therapy, if I just eat healthy enough and work out, I'll be rid of anxiety and depression. And so once I realized, no, this is a mental illness, it's here to stay, instead of trying to believe that I could just get rid of it eventually if I work hard enough, it's switched to, like, this is something that I live with. How can I do all the things that I want to do and feel great and still be happy while working around this? It's always going to be there, and it's not going to stop me from doing what I want to do, especially with businesses. We talk about the idea high. We get so excited. We want to do all the things. So it certainly made it really rough in the beginning, but I think entrepreneurship also helped me with those parts that like we've talked about, changing your relationship to failure, being more patient, being more stoic with the ups and downs, and being calmer. I think there's a lot of lessons I have learned from entrepreneurship and the kind of crazy environments that it brings that have, I guess, helped me adapt more in dealing with that. Yeah.
That's a great point. And with you realizing that this is just something you eventually manage instead of work away, was that something that came to you during Cozy Cactus or more recently with Rotiv?
I think that was around the Cozy Cactus time. I can't remember. It happened sometime in therapy. You have that epiphany, and I was just like, it was a bit of a bummer at first. Now it's like, okay, I have the right mentality around it now.
Those breakthroughs are everything. Sometimes they're a bit jarring, but they really do help you rethink or shift your mind around what you originally thought it was, or reframe things for you. And thinking of something as something that you have to manage versus something that, this is something that's temporary and I'll get rid of it and it'll never return again, I think can set you up for failure. And you're not even properly managing your own expectations around what you're battling, which can be really hard. It can make it even more hard to face it head on in that case. So I think, Lauren, talking about mental health and where we're headed in this direction where it's we're trying to destigmatize what it means to have anxiety or suffer from depression or any other things that can contribute to the deterioration of your mental health. I think it's super important because for me, based on the information I've read about it, it just seems like it's really sad to think that so many people before our generation and time have just been silently dealing with this and accepting it as normal. It actually is normal, but stuffing it and not dealing with it is damaging, and we should not normalize that. I think we need to normalize talking about it, being open about it, being real about it, and then even our personal experiences, what we've been through, and then how we've coped or managed, because it can really help other people.
I also want to point out too that Brian doesn't have anxiety or depression. He'll feel some anxiety here and there, but it's not like the constant anxiety that I have. But he still goes to therapy. And it's funny when we're telling like my parents, they're like, oh, is everything okay? Because that generation thinks, oh, there must be something really wrong. No, there's just like a lot of stress that he has to deal with when it comes to the business. And anyone has stuff in their past and baggage and whatnot. And most people, I don't know about most people, but people can function fine, obviously, without therapy. I just wanted to provide an example. Like, here's an entrepreneur who doesn't really have any mental illness, but still finds value in going to therapy and being able to talk through the ups and downs and the different stresses related to running your business.
I feel like there's so many people who I would find it hard to believe that there's anyone out there that is untouched by mental health, whether it's their own or watching their significant other or a friend or family member deal with it, because we all have those moments. And I even read something recently that even someone who adapts to just being high functioning and doing everything on your own is a sign that your mental health has been through some trauma or some things where you have to operate in this manner, or this is normal for you. I recognized 6 years ago that I probably needed to go to therapy. I didn't feel anxiety. I didn't feel depressed. I didn't feel anything, but I knew with a lot of my personal circumstances, I'm like, I'm currently dealing with a lot, and I probably am not feeling everything just yet because I haven't fully processed all of what it means. And I should have went to therapy then. And I even recognized that I should have. But of course, the nature of moving and working, I delayed it to a point where I went to therapy to essentially make sure that I could survive, to make sure I didn't succumb to some of the mental pressures that I was feeling. It was at that point, no choice. I had to go. And I would highly encourage others not to get to that point, because usually if you are self-aware or even tapped into your feelings a little bit, you can recognize that you could benefit from talking to someone about anything that you're going through in the current moment, whether it's navigating a new job, starting out as an entrepreneur, or family, whatever the case may be. There's always something there to uncover or dig into.
And it's different than just talking with a good friend or family member. Like a trained therapist, like a good therapist, will help you navigate your mind. And it's a different experience. This is what they're trained to do. You can talk in a judgment-free zone, and they are there to help you guide your mind and figure out root issues of things or shed light on different perspectives. Like, it's not the same as just like, oh, I talked to my friend, like that's good enough. You might be burdening them. You might be emotionally dumping and unloading on people who can't carry all that burden. What if they're going through stuff too? I'm not saying don't lean on like your support system and people you care about, but I think that therapy is one of those things that is just, it's different. It's professional help. If you're going to go to a personal trainer and invest in a personal trainer for your physical health, why aren't you investing in your mental health with a therapist?
For sure. I'm hopeful to see where we are in the next few years as this mental health conversation continues. And we've seen so many people take courageous stances on their mental health in the public eye. And I really think that just being open about it and talking about it, it's going to really change our just overall approach to how we deal with mental health. Is there anything else that you want to share with our listeners with regard to the state of mental health and being an entrepreneur, or anything else you'd like to add to this conversation right now?
I mean, there's a specific kind of therapy that I want more people to know about called EMDR. I'm not going to go super in depth about it, but It just helps you process trauma using bilateral stimulation.
Oh, wow.
So it's, if you have a positive experience, your brain processes it, you move on. When you have a negative experience, your brain doesn't process it. It still stays with you over and over. EMDR helps you process that. Move
Interesting.
on. I did that for a few years, and I still do it on and off depending on what is needed. It can be for recent events. It could be for like really deep past events, but I have found that to be incredibly helpful. But I think it's something that I think would be so beneficial to all entrepreneurs because, like I said, 72% are directly or indirectly affected by mental health issues. That's insane. That is such a high number. And I think that it'll help your bottom line. People are always like, oh, is it worth it? And usually people are like, oh, it's not worth it trying to find a therapist, because it sucks trying to find a therapist, one that you connect with, and you spend an hour dredging up things that, are unpleasant. So I understand why there's resistance to therapy, or even just taking care of your mental health, because you think you go through life and you're just like, oh, just need to be more mentally tough, or you just compartmentalize it, push it aside. People don't really prioritize it. So I think that it's important for us to discuss mental health and help continue to remove the stigma and continue advocating for people to prioritize it more. Yeah, that's the main takeaway here, is it's not a sign of weakness. If you break your leg, that's not a sign of weakness. You broke your leg.
Right. Yeah.
It's a sign of weakness for your bone, I suppose, like your bone broke.
Right.
But like, people don't view physical illness as weakness, and neither should we view mental illness as weakness as well.
Yeah. And I'd like to add to that, Lauren, that as entrepreneurs, sometimes we live in our bubble, but the reality is life does not stop just because you're an entrepreneur, or just because you have this great business idea that you're fleshing out and that you're trying to bring to market. Life is still going on around you. And it's important for us as entrepreneurs to step outside of that bubble, or even invite more people into our bubble so they have an understanding of what we are going through. I think entrepreneurs close a lot of people off unintentionally, because when we sit at dinner or we talk amongst our friends about what's going on in our professional careers, a lot of them can't relate if they're not also entrepreneurs. They don't know the pains of hiring, scaling, dealing with weird internal stuff that only entrepreneurs know, that language that we often speak about. And so we feel unheard and unseen sometimes. And so we just decide when we go out, we're not going to talk about work, right? We're not going to talk about what our business is or isn't doing, or what failures we encountered, and we keep that all in. And I think we need to be more conscious about allowing people to see our challenges and not just show off our successes, because I think that's a little misleading. And I think it exacerbates mental health problems, right? If you're trying to give off a perception that you've made it, or you're making it, or whatever the case may be, without showing some of the bad stuff, you feel the pressure of trying to keep up with this lifestyle or this image that you've curated. And I think it's just important to be real, and people respect that. And I think the only way that we can avoid or minimize this isolation that we feel as entrepreneurs from time to time is by sharing our stories and allowing people to develop an understanding so they can relate and help us out. That would also be a main takeaway for me.
Before we completely sign off, there is one book that I want to recommend that has to do with mental health and entrepreneurship. It's called The Upside of Being Down: How Mental Health Struggles Led to My Greatest Successes in Work and Life. And it's by Jen Gotch. And that book in particular really helped me with dealing with mental health and entrepreneurship, and knowing that I'm not the only one who, goes through it. For an entrepreneur who has anxiety, depression, I thought it was a really good read. So recommending that to all of you out there.
That's great. I will definitely check that out. I haven't read that. I'll go ahead and get that ordered.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please like, subscribe, share, all the things. We are on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and you can connect with either me or Bridget on LinkedIn. And thank you, Bridget.
Take care. Thanks, Lauren. Take care of yourself, guys. Make sure that you definitely adhere to any red flags, and also look out for anyone else around you too. They may not know that they need to focus on some things. But thanks for listening.
Bye.